When we talk about pleasure, especially the kind that catches people by surprise, we need to start with the body because the body tells us more than we often give it credit for. One of the biggest reasons this experience feels so unexpectedly sweet for many women comes down to anatomy, specifically the sensitivity of the posterior vaginal wall. Now, most people are familiar with the idea of the G-spot and clitoral stimulation, but what often gets overlooked is how rich the entire vaginal canal is in nerve endings, particularly in areas we don't think about as much. The back wall of the vagina, which is stimulated more directly during rear entry positions, is uniquely positioned to create sensations that feel different, sometimes deeper, more intense, even more intimate. It's not that it's better or worse than other kinds of stimulation, it's that it hits differently. This kind of pressure targets areas that aren't usually engaged during other positions, and that contrast alone can create a new kind of pleasure, simply because it activates less familiar pathways. The brain reacts to that novelty with curiosity and excitement, which enhances arousal and emotional intensity. And it's not just about nerves. The angle created in this position often leads to a kind of internal massage, putting subtle pressure on adjacent pelvic structures and even areas that overlap with the anterior wall, like the A-spot or deeper parts of the G-spot. So while the stimulation may seem like it's focused on one area, the actual experience often lights up several pleasure zones at once, sometimes even without conscious awareness. All of this happens while the body is positioned in a more open, exposed posture, which increases physical sensation while also amplifying the emotional experience. It's a combination of mechanics and mindset, a blend of what's happening inside the body and what the brain is processing in the moment. When women say it feels different or surprisingly good, it's not an accident. It's rooted in biology, in the way our nervous system is wired to respond to deep rhythmic stimulation that comes from a new angle and targets fresh territory. The body knows what it's doing, and sometimes, when we listen closely, it teaches us more than we ever expect. Let's talk about the psychology behind why something that feels so simple on the surface can feel incredibly powerful underneath. One of the most overlooked reasons women find rear entry intimacy so pleasurable is rooted not in the body, but in the mind. And it starts with the element of novelty and even taboo. Because let's be honest, when something feels a little forbidden, a little different from the usual script, it naturally triggers curiosity and heightened awareness. The brain is the biggest sexual organ we have. It controls how we interpret sensations, how we react emotionally, and how we process pleasure. When a woman is in a situation that breaks the norm, even in a safe, consensual way, her mind becomes more alert. That heightened alertness can translate into increased sensitivity. So while the body may be responding to physical touch, the mind is amplifying that response through a mix of excitement, suspense, and unpredictability. That mental cocktail often intensifies the physical pleasure far more than people realize. There's also the way this taps into a deeper psychological experience, feeling desired in a raw, uninhibited way that can make a woman feel powerful and cherished at the same time. That contrast, feeling bold yet vulnerable, in control yet surrendered, is a dynamic that fuels deeper emotional engagement. It's not about dominance or submission in a stereotypical sense. It's about releasing social expectations and just being present in the moment, with another person, fully open to sensation and experience. Taboo, when handled with mutual respect and communication, doesn't have to be something shameful or risky. It can be a doorway into emotional intimacy because you're both stepping into a space that's more private, more intentional, and often more revealing. And when a woman gives herself permission to explore that free from guilt, judgment, or pressure, the result is often a kind of pleasure that's not just physical, but liberating. So when we say it feels sweet, we're not just describing a bodily response. We're talking about the mental freedom that comes with breaking routine, letting go of control, and allowing pleasure to come from a place of curiosity, not just expectation. When we talk about intimacy, real intimacy, it's not just about the physical connection, it's about the emotional foundation underneath it. In this position, this kind of experience can sometimes unlock something deeper for women, a sense of emotional trust and vulnerability that enhances everything else. Because in order for a woman to fully enjoy this type of intimacy, she has to feel safe. She has to feel that her partner sees her, respects her boundaries, and is tuned in to her signals. And when that safety is present, what opens up is more than just the body, it's the heart and the mind. There's something incredibly personal about allowing someone to be close to you in a way that feels exposed or different. That openness, that willingness to be seen in such a raw and unfiltered state is not something that can be forced, it's given. It's a gift. And when a woman offers that kind of trust and it's received with care and attentiveness, the emotional reward is huge. That's when intimacy stops being just an act and starts becoming an experience. In this context, the sweetness that many women describe isn't just about sensation, it's about being held emotionally, even in a moment that's physically intense or out of the ordinary. And that emotional holding allows the nervous system to relax, to lean into the moment rather than guard against it. The body opens when the mind feels safe, and when both are aligned, the result is a level of connection that feels deeply satisfying, sometimes even healing. This type of trust-based intimacy can create a feedback loop. The more emotionally supported a woman feels, the more pleasure she can experience. The more pleasure she experiences, the deeper her sense of connection becomes. It's not transactional, it's relational. It's about presence, communication, and the courage to let go of performance in favor of real connection. So yes, the sweetness comes from touch, pressure, and nerve endings, but it also comes from knowing she's with someone who honors her vulnerability. And in that moment, what she feels isn't just physical, it's a reflection of how deeply she's allowed herself to be known. When we think about pleasure, we often focus on the obvious areas: external stimulation, the clitoris, or what's traditionally taught as the main source of female satisfaction. But the truth is, the body has layers of pleasure pathways, and many of them are internal, subtle, and incredibly responsive when approached with the right kind of touch and angle. Rear entry positions, especially when there's patience, communication, and attentiveness, can stimulate zones that are usually overlooked. And that's where the real surprise happens for a lot of women. One of the key players here is the A spot, which is located deeper inside the vaginal canal, near the cervix, along the front wall. It's not something you reach easily with most angles, but in certain positions, especially from behind, there's a natural curve and depth that allows for consistent, gentle stimulation of this area. And what's fascinating is that the A spot responds to soft, rhythmic pressure. It doesn't need anything aggressive to feel intense. In fact, it's often the slow buildup, the steady connection, that creates the most powerful sensation. Another important factor is how rear entry can subtly engage the G-spot and surrounding areas in a completely different way. It's not a direct poke, it's more of a press or a massage from a new direction. That shift in sensation wakes up areas of the vaginal wall that might have become desensitized through routine. So even if a woman thinks she knows what feels good, changing the angle can unlock a new kind of awareness. And what's really remarkable is how this kind of internal stimulation isn't just about one point, it's about how all these zones work together. The vaginal walls have rich nerve networks that light up when engaged in harmony. That's why many women report not just sharp bursts of pleasure, but deep rolling waves that feel more emotional, more connected to their entire body, rather than localized in one place. So while it might look like just a position change, what's really happening is a remapping of sensation, one that taps into the deeper architecture of female pleasure. And when done with care, attention, and mutual respect, it often creates an experience that surprises even the most experienced partners. There's something incredibly powerful about anticipation, especially in intimacy. Our minds are wired to respond not just to what's happening in the moment, but to what we expect to happen next. And one of the reasons women describe rear entry as feeling unexpectedly sweet is because of how it taps into that exact mechanism. It creates a shift, not just in position, but in dynamics. That subtle shift in control and perspective can completely reframe the experience in the brain. When a woman is in a position where she can't see her partner directly, something interesting happens. Her other senses become more active. She feels more. She hears more. She pays closer attention to every movement, every breath, every pause. The anticipation builds naturally, and that sense of suspense, of not knowing exactly what's coming next, can make the sensations feel more intense, more thrilling. This isn't about fear or discomfort. It's about surrendering to trust and allowing the body to respond freely without trying to predict or perform. There's also the shift in control. In many cases, this position invites a kind of power exchange that isn't necessarily about dominance in the traditional sense. It's about balance. Some women find that letting go, even momentarily, allows them to access a deeper kind of pleasure. Not because they're being overpowered, but because they're choosing to release the mental checklist, the pressure to guide or manage the moment. And when that mental load drops, the body has more room to. On the flip side, for some women, this position can actually create a stronger sense of personal power. It's bold, unapologetic, and confident. The mindset shifts depending on the emotional context. But either way, it adds a psychological layer that makes the physical experience far more immersive. It becomes a dance between anticipation and presence, between giving and receiving. That interplay, the not knowing, the heightened sensitivity, the shifting roles, stimulates the brain's pleasure centers in a completely different way. It deepens focus, intensifies sensation, and brings a kind of raw, unfiltered connection that many women find deeply satisfying. Not just because of how it feels physically, but because of how it pulls them fully into the moment. One of the most fascinating things about female pleasure is how interconnected everything is. We often think of stimulation as being very targeted, like the clitoris has to be touched directly for anything to happen. But what a lot of people don't realize is that indirect stimulation can sometimes be just as powerful, and in certain cases, even more pleasurable because of the way it builds slowly and spreads through the nervous system. Rear entry positions have this unique ability to activate areas that connect to the clitoris in more subtle, layered ways. Let's break it down a little. The clitoris isn't just the small part you see externally, it actually extends deep into the body. It has internal structures that wrap around the vaginal canal like a wishbone. So when there's pressure inside, especially in deeper parts of the vagina, those inner clitoral legs can be indirectly stimulated. It's not like pressing a button, it's more like creating a wave that rolls through and reaches those inner structures in a softer, deeper way. This kind of indirect clitoral stimulation happens a lot during rear entry, especially when there's depth, rhythm, and consistency. The angle creates pressure along the anterior wall, which can send signals all the way through the pelvic network. Add in the right pacing and emotional connection, and suddenly the clitoris is being activated from the inside out, without even being touched directly. And that's a huge reason why women say the pleasure feels different. It's not sharp or surface level, it's internal, building, and sometimes catches them completely off guard in the best way. What makes it even more special is how this type of stimulation often aligns with a more emotional or full-body release. Because it's not isolated, it doesn't stay in one place, it travels. It creates that wave-like experience where everything blends together and becomes harder to define, but more overwhelming in the most satisfying sense. It's in those moments when a woman might feel like she's completely lost in sensation, not because of something being done to her, but because her body is responding from a place that's deep, natural, and completely her own. It's easy to fall into patterns when it comes to intimacy, familiar routines, familiar positions, familiar rhythms. And while there's comfort in that, comfort isn't always where the most intense pleasure comes from. Sometimes it's the break from routine that wakes up the senses, creates excitement, and reminds the body just how much more it's capable of feeling. That's one of the key reasons rear entry feels so unexpectedly sweet for many women. It shakes up the script in just the right way. When you introduce something new into the experience, even something as simple as a change in angle or perspective, the brain takes notice. Suddenly the autopilot switches off. She's not just going through the motions, she's present, alert and more in tune with every sensation. The unpredictability of the position, especially if it's not the usual go-to, triggers a sense of curiosity that deepens focus. That heightened awareness enhances everything: touch, sound, breath, emotional energy. It turns a physical act into a much fuller experience. But it's not just about physical stimulation, it's about what the novelty represents. It can signal a willingness to explore, to grow together, to keep intimacy dynamic rather than static. That kind of emotional message carries weight. It tells a woman, this isn't routine, you're not being taken for granted. This is still new, still exciting, still worth exploring. And that message, when received in the right emotional context, can open her up to deeper trust and more freedom in her own expression. It also allows her to discover new aspects of her pleasure. She might not know she likes a certain angle until she tries it. She might not realize how much her body responds to a different kind of pressure or rhythm. That discovery alone can create a lasting shift, not just in what she enjoys, but in how confident and connected she feels in her own body. So yes, the sweetness comes from the sensation, but it's also rooted in the element of surprise, the signal that something new is happening, and that she is worth the effort it takes to keep things fresh, alive, and deeply connected.